Hello, Jim Lurkey, owner of Safety Connections, and we assist in the safety program at Central Stainless, and I welcome you as a new employee. And I'm going to go through a checklist, and you should be given a copy of that checklist, and I'm going to cover a bunch of the things that it's like need to know. So with that, let me begin. Lockout, tagout. Two different types of employees. One is called authorized, and those are the ones that are actually been verified by the company to actually perform lockout, tagout. Those that perform lockout, tagout, the biggest single thing is they got to de-energize all the energy in any source, whether it's equipment, it's power tools. That's what's required, including elimination of any residual energy. They got to release that. The other employee is called the affected. Those are the ones that are not authorized to actually perform lockout, tagout. When does lockout, tagout occur? Whenever we're doing maintenance and or service work. Number two, communications with others. And there's going to be a handout, all right? But here's what we expect. To work with each other out of respect. And you'll see the third star down, it talks about in a caring, kind, asking, helping way. Respecting each other's feelings. So remember that, and you'll have a handout on that. Next, know your location as it relates to first aid supplies, wherever it is. You don't know, make sure that we're asking somebody. Emergency evacuation. All right, one thing is if it's medical. The other thing is, where do you go if there's an emergency such as a fire? Out always the nearest exit and meet up next to the driveway area. Unless you're working at a different location, all right, you need to know that before you start your work at that new location. Next, accident reporting required immediately. It's a win-win. From an employee standpoint, I call it CYB, cover your butt, because that's a requirement, reporting it immediately. From a company management standpoint, we can take the corrective actions if we know about something. Change training, incorporate different training. So it's a win-win situation. So requirement, reporting immediately. Next, safety glasses and side shields required. Okay? Shoe requirements. Composite sturdy shoe is what's required. Hearing protection. Voluntary, we encourage it. Cleaning. First of all, when you put it in, up over the back of your head, pull your up and back, seat the plug. Let go, and the last thing you do is remove your index finger. When you're done using them, put them into a baggie, keeping them clean, prevent infections, okay? And when you throw them away, throw them in the garbage can, please. Next, forklifts and hand jacks. Before you're using them, you gotta be trained. Biggest question we'll hear is, I've been trained before. That's not good enough. You need to be trained according to Central Stainless. So keep that in mind. Cranes, jibs, hoists, gotta be trained. All right? Don't know how to do it. If you do know how to do it, at least walk through the training. It includes pinch points. Hands, where you're placing your hands so you don't get it in between, whether it's the connecting device or inside the actual hook. It's gotta be outside and never in a pinch point. So always remember that. Inspection, always pre-use inspections required. So I grab a chain, I'm looking at the hook, the spring, anything deformed, stretching, cracks, splits, tears, anything. Regarding slings, you gotta look if there's any fraying, if there's any orangish, reddish strings coming through. And lastly, you gotta be able to read the capacity on a sling, which is engraved. If you can't do any of those or those things develop, you got to cut it up and throw it out. From a chain standpoint, it needs to be on a tag, and it's got to be readable. Next, lifting. Lifting, we have a handout, excuse me here, that'll look like something like this. And what are we really encouraging? What we're really encouraging is the fact that shoulder width, 1 foot in front of the other, okay? Bend with our knees, keeping always our hands close to our body when we're lifting. Head is straight and back as straight as possible. Lift with your legs. Brief demonstration, a handout. Next, magnet. Magnet. All magnets, every time you use it, it's got to be cleaned on the bottom. There can be no dust or residue, whatever. It's got to be cleaned every time there's use of a magnet. And never overload it. Never. Respirators. When you use a nuisance respirator, we got to always understand we need to put it in a baggie when we're done using it. Don't ever give it to somebody else. So keep that in mind to keep it clean, and only, you are the one to use it. Next on the list, guarding. Any and all guards in place must remain in place. That includes toe guards, all right? There's an 1/8 and a 1/4 inch guideline, but I tell people, whether the top or bottom, always remember an 1/8 inch. Keep it close, but make sure the toe guards are in place. Parking lot safety. Be aware, 25% of all accidents are happening roughly in parking lots. So when coming or leaving, always remember that we have to be safe no matter what. And other people's safety matters. So keep that in mind. Personal protective equipment. We're covering some of those. Always know what is or isn't required. And if you're in doubt sometime, because that happens, we gotta make sure we're asking to make sure we're wearing the right and what's required PPE. Remember, it's your safety that's at stake here. Next, pre-use inspections. Everything we grab or use calls for a pre-use inspection. So that's whether it's a hand tool, it's a power tool, all right? It's a ladder, okay? It's a cord, an electric cord. Got to do a pre-use inspection. That glance, make sure all is okay. Required. Face shields, if we're grinding. Glasses, goggles, possibly, always that face shield. So that if something happens with the wheel, that we're protected. Exits, primary and secondary exits, always go out the nearest exit. Secondary is whatever's the closest. That's where you go out, and make sure you stay away the building and meet up with your group in that location. Tornado shelter, men's bathroom, keep that in mind. And I take it, it's like the west side of the building, but that may change place to place. So if you're going to a site, remember, you got to ask to know where they are. That's part of our responsibility. Know where your bathrooms and lunchrooms are. If not, we got to ask, because it's our obligation as a company to make sure you know. And if you don't know, I'm just encouraging you to make sure to ask. How do we communicate? Okay, we communicate through PA, we communicate verbally, but again, site to site, that may change. If in doubt, we must always ask first. So often we'll see things or we'll be involved in things and we're not doing the proper due diligence, if you will. So the simple rule of thumb is this: there's only one stupid question. It's the one that's not asked. So ask questions if in doubt. Cutting. Always when we grab something, we're always cutting away from all body parts. Always away from all body parts. When done using a knife, retract, Put it away from us, not on the edge of a table. Okay? So always keep that in mind. COVID, CDC guidelines, folks. CDC guidelines. What does that say? 6, stay home, keeping your distance 6 feet or more, wherever that's possible. Sanitize more often than not. Wash your hands with soap and water. Biggest single things we can do, all right, to take care of ourselves. You can wear a mask if you want. Those are all different options. How do you know for sure if you're testing positive? Use a test thing that's out there. They're out there a dime a dozen. Okay? So that's the only way to really foolproof it if that's what you want to know. Next, taking off safety glasses. I'm just looking for a pair here. I don't see one right now in front of me, but always take your glasses off, leaning forward, and it's away from you. Always away from you. Stuff builds up, possibly on your eyebrows, can get into your eyes. We don't want you having to suffer from an eye injury. Next, arc flash. No one, unless you're a certified electrician, ever goes into a panel, electric panel, and takes that cover off that's around the circuit breakers. Never. All right? Because if you do and you're certified, you have to go through training to make sure you're using the right required PPE, because it all changes different based on different voltages. So please remember that. Next, second opinion policy. We have what's called a second opinion policy, which means this. At any time, there's a difference of opinion between you, whether you're management or hourly, there's a difference of opinion regarding safety and a corrective action. We are then required to go to somebody else in management to get their opinion with zero retaliation against the person bringing up the issue. Whether you're management or not makes no difference. If there is retaliation on behalf of management, they are subject up to and including discharge. First time, every time. That's how we take safety here at Central Stainless. Next, from getting a hold of me if you need to, all right, my telephone number, it'll be on the checklist, 920-912-7233. Grinding wheel we covered, storage we've covered. Welding. If we're welding, curtains need to be around us. If it's a permit, it's a required based on a client we work for. We got to fill out the permit. We got to know how to fill it out and perform that task as well. If we don't know, we got to make sure to ask. I always like making sure that when you see this video, to make sure that you have been introduced to some other team members. It's important. If we got questions, we got to be able to ask, and I want you to be able to ask the right people. So keep that in mind. Tour, wherever you're going, we should have a tour before we start so we know where, what's what. I don't care if it's the bathrooms we talked about, the lunchroom, all right, fire extinguishers, that type of stuff, including where we go for a tornado shelter, the fire evacuation. Take that walkthrough. Make sure we do that. Next, stretching. Again, it's going to be a handout, and encourage everyone before the shift, during the shift, and after the shift. Do some minor stretching. Now, it's not physical exercise, it's stretching, including some back stretches. So, highly encourage that. And there's a handout. Exit locations. Everyone should know your exit locations from any site. All right, no matter where it is, whether it's at Marshfield or it's a site off of our shop, if you will. Safety is a condition of employment. What does that mean? What it means is simply this. We have rules and regulations like most all companies do. Safety is a condition of employment means this. We are to follow the guidelines and rules that are in place here at Central Stainless. It's a condition. It's not abnormal. We're no different than other plants. So keep that in mind. Hazardous spill. If there's a hazardous spill, here's what I'm going to tell you to do. We got to notify a supervisor or a person in charge immediately. Reason being, we want to make absolutely certain, number one, the employee's protected. Number two is a supervisor or a person in charge should know what chemicals are on site. Okay? And by doing so, they'll know what to do from a cleanup standpoint. Because number one is making sure the employees are safe or evacuated. Number two, if we're indoors, we don't want it going into a drain. If we're outdoors, we don't want it seeping into the ground, if you will. Next, bloodborne pathogens. Who carries them? We do, all employees. So whether it's phlegm, it's vomit, it's you name it, blood, we're carrying that. So what do we got to do? Universal precautions, protect ourselves. That's what I'm telling you. One thing is if you do the cleanup and it's minor, double bagged. The other thing is if it's any place other than on our own body or clothing, we must, required to use a disinfectant, 10% minimum, to clean things up, dry them off. If it's other employees, we got to make sure to notify a supervisor or person in charge so that it's disposed of properly, and that includes putting it into what's known as a biohazard bag. And we follow our universal precautions control plan when dealing with blood or phlegm. Meeting requirements, as your company outlines when safety training and meetings are required, we must follow them. Chalks, anytime we're loading or unloading, chalks need to be in place. We don't want people in tractors when we're loading and unloading. So keep that in mind, and that would include if ever we got to back up against the dock. All right, we want the chalks in place. We got to protect ourselves. Critical. Safety, your number one priority. What does that mean? No matter what the circumstance, no shortcuts. What it means, we do it the right way. What it means, if we're in doubt, we got to ask. Don't do something first. It's the opposite. That's the kind of culture. That's a must here at Central Stainless. Next, goals. Your goal should be what our goal is as a company. The way we come to work is the way we go home every single day. Our goal. It needs to be your goal. Next, near misses. Example of a near miss. We encourage reporting. Something's on a rack and it falls off. No one's injured. We can look at what can we do to change that process? What can we do to change our training? If we don't know that, and I'm a supervisor, how do I just change something? So we want everybody's involvement. Next, fire extinguishers. Fire extinguisher use is voluntary. Number two, I like using the word pass. All right, pull the pin, aim at the base of the fire, squeeze the handle, and sweep at the base of the fire. Roughly 6 to 8 feet away. Always keep your door to an exit, means of egress. And if you're outside, by the way, a tip, always have the wind at your back so it's blowing the fire away from you. So keep that in mind. Next, general electrical. We're going to grab a cord, electrical cord. We're going to inspect it for the ground, 3-prong plugs. They're not bent or damaged, any cuts or frays. All right, that's what we got to do. From an electrical standpoint, whether it's a switch that's broke, something is wrong, our process of corrective action is we got to notify a person in charge or a supervisor. And we got to remember to do that inspection. Next, ladder safety. Ladder safety. On a step ladder or a regular extension ladder, required to do a pre-shift, pre-use. Pre-use means we're looking at the rungs, the framework, the base, all right? Making sure that they have the that label on, so that label also that it's readable. The feet work and are in place, nothing damaged, never paint the ladder. All right? There also must be, so there's no dents, and we must always use 3 points of contact. 2 feet, 1 hand, 2 hands, 1 foot. All right? Labels must be able to be readable as well, capacity labels, which simply means maximum load on a ladder at any one point in time. And remember, again, 3 points of contact. What else do I want to tell you? No carrying or no 2 people on a ladder. If it's a step ladder, never step on the top 2 rungs of a step ladder. All right? On an extension ladder, never step on the top 3. An extension ladder over the edge line must be at least 3 feet over an edge line. When not in use, they got to be either in a secured position, step ladder locked, or laying flat on the ground. If not, they should be tied off or secured somehow, some way so they don't fall. So keep that in mind. 50-pound weight guideline, everybody has different limits with lifting. So it's only stated so that it keeps that in mind. When you're in doubt, that's why we have lift trucks and things like that to help us, lifting devices. So just keep that in mind. Next, staying out of harm's way. Everyone's got to know that part of any safety program, we got to keep all body parts out of harm's way no matter what it is. If there's something going overhead or the crane is moving, we must have all body parts out of the harm's way from head to toe. No deviating from that. Next, walking working surfaces. Know what you're walking, know what you're dealing with before something happens. And always do this. Always be thinking, looking, and listening before we go. And if we're in doubt, always ask. Okay? Remember that. Next, fall protection. Once it required in the shop, anytime we're out working over 4 feet and we're going off of a ladder, okay, 4 feet or more. You got to be trained, all right, on fall protection, the proper use, proper inspection, the proper fitting, the tying off, got to go through training before. So please keep that in mind. Confined spaces, if you're going into a confined space, one means of egress in and out must be trained. And if there's any kind of hazards whatsoever, it must be monitored to make sure that before you're going in, we're safe to do so. Required. Hand tools, power tools, we got to do our pre-use inspections. Any and everything that's got a seatbelt, we got to wear it. From the standpoint of global harmonizing, there are 2 handouts. One that includes the old system, and the other one is the new system on pictograms. And this also has identified the seriousness from 0 to 4 under the old system and 1 to 4 under global harmonizing. There's another handout that shows you and demonstrate what the actual pictograms are of the 9. So you don't have to worry. You get a copy of that to help you to know what kind of chemical we're dealing with. And that includes the severity. Standard operating procedures. Folks, if we don't know how to do an operating procedure, we got to ask first. It's required. Ergonomics. What do I want to tell you about ergonomics? Lifting is critical. Use of our hands, switching our hands. Hand to form as straight as possible is a good thing to do. All right? Doing those exercises I was telling you about, a good thing to do. So please keep that in mind. Ergonomics is important. Next on the list is cost. I got a handout going back from 2022 that shows cost based on a 3% profit. Direct cost of $21,959. In indirect cost over $1.5 million in sales to make up for that. We need good choices and for our employees to be safe. So please keep that in mind. We have an alternate duty program, which simply is a restricted duty program. If you get injured, we're going to do everything we can to keep you working. So trying to work with you in the healing process if that were ever to happen. Personal problems, employee assistance program. You have my number. I do individual one-on-one counseling. My wife and I have lost 3 children, and I do one-on-one counseling. So just know one thing, if I'm ever called, what's said there stays there, is strictly confidential. Next, corrective action. Any kind of corrective action, we talk to our supervisor or a person in charge. Bomb threat. Bomb threat, if you're getting a call, everybody has cell phones, listen. When you're done listening, step 2, call 911. Step 3, evacuate like you would a fire. And just remember one thing, if that ever happens, when the authorities arrive, the authorities are in charge. Next, violence in the workplace. What do I want to tell you about violence in the workplace? The bottom line is, there's 2 kinds, verbal and physical. Verbal is, examples, I'm going to get you. You're going to pay for this. The words of, I'm going to step outside right now, let's go out, get out there and solve this. Those are verbal threats. The other one is physical in nature. Well, it's pushing, shoving, or actually swinging. All right? Any kind of violence, subject to termination first time, every time. That also includes harassment. Harassment. Harassment is anything that's bullying in nature, demeaning somebody, okay? And the result of that also is subject to termination first time, every time. Somebody who doesn't respond, remember that second opinion with safety? It's taken serious, folks, so we gotta follow the procedure. Critical. So why is safety so important? Not only from a cost standpoint, but here's from OSHA at the beginning of this year, just a fine in itself can cost up to $15,625 per. Repeat or willful, all right, that is now up to $156,259 per violation. That's a lot of money, and an employer can't write that off. So just want you to know that. Gas cylinders. Make sure they're secured. Make sure you understand the flammability and you understand how to transport them. Okay? And that they're used and you're trained accordingly to use them in the right way. The next thing I want to briefly talk about is ammonia. All right? Here's what we need to know. Okay? What you need to know. And I'm just going to review this. Wear personal protective equipment. To work with liquid ammonia, you may need eye, face, and skin protection, PPE. Working with liquid or gaseous ammonia, you may require a respirator. Take hot work permitting precautions. Whenever hot work will be performed in areas where there's ammonia present, piping, vessels, containers that have held ammonia will be welded, soldered, drilled, or cut. Purge ammonia first. Use proper ventilation. Never work with ammonia in an unventilated area. Always ensure that you have adequate ventilation and make sure the ventilation is non-sparking or explosion proof. Storing separately from incompatible chemicals away from heat, ignition sources. Know what to do in case of a spill or leak. When you do work with ammonia, know where your emergency escape respirators are located. If ammonia leaks or is spilled, put on a respirator. Leave the immediate area. Report the spill and leaks so it can be appropriately controlled immediately. Know how to respond to splashes. Liquid ammonia can burn your eyes. Know where there's an emergency eye wash, where that's stored. And if any in doubt whatsoever, we must ask. Scaffolding. Must inspect before use. We must also know how to use it. So training is a requirement, including the access ladders. Okay? So keep that in mind. Welding. If we're at a site, they require welding permits. We must fill them out, and we must follow the guidelines of the general contractor who hires us. Lastly, if we're in doubt, Always keep in mind when we talk about walking, working surfaces, always keep in mind first we got to be always thinking. In addition to thinking, we always got to be looking. Number 2. Number 3, we always got to be listening. And 4, if ever in doubt, we must always ask. That's the message. That's the checklist. I welcome you. I look forward to meeting you at some point in the future when I'm at the site in person. So with that, welcome to Central Stainless and make good choices, the right choices, and if in doubt, always ask first. Take care.